What is going on?
What'd you do now, Dan?
Hold on. I hear myself 3 times. Okay, so is it live? What's going on? I'm sorry.
Says it
So
is.
live stuff is hard.
That's your
Ah,
explanation?
yeah. Oh my goodness. So it is wonderful to see you. Welcome to another Workshop Wednesday, brought to you by schoolbookkeeping.com, which is casual conversations for serious workflows. So we should be live online. I think I see a few folks watching. Today, we're going to be talking about taking customer deposits in QuickBooks Desktop 2024. So, of course, I bring my online colleague from as a co-host. Unfortunately, Carrie, had a crisis and needed to bow out late last night. So called an audible, and because I don't want to do this by myself. Uh, so I need someone to talk to. So welcome back, Rachel, and thanks again for filling in. How are you?
I'm good. I always actually I love to learn about QuickBooks Desktop. I'm definitely not an expert, so anything you are sharing about desktop, I will gladly hear it.
Because it's in the ecosystem, and you're definitely going to hear about it, even if you are an online specialist like yourself, right?
Hmm.
So, just to be transparent, Rachel has an internet guy coming. So right in the middle of this, you may have to stop her video if that happens. So this is the dilemma of doing things live. so so that's that. So let's talk a little bit about customer deposits. We did a workshop a couple years ago about how to handle customer deposits, and the situation is, hey, I'm doing something for a customer, and I need some money up front, right? So that not a a deposit like a bank deposit, because that's one of those words that tends to have part of those gets you thinking in different things, because when I hear the word invoice, I think customer invoice, but you may be thinking of a vendor invoice as well. So those are some of those dual meaning words that could potentially be causing an issue for someone. So we're talking about the situation. Hey, I need an upfront deposit. So this will typically happen in contractor world, right? Where, hey, I'm not going to start this job unless I get something out of out of the customer, because there's typically some purchases of supplies and things like that, and they don't want to take it out of their own pocket to do these things. Want to make sure that the customer kind of has some skin in the game, type of thing. Non-refundable deposits, those types of things. What kind of scenarios have you run into, Rachel, with in your world where that kind of situation comes up?
Definitely. So now you switched down. So now you're on that side. And sorry, now I'm
Oh,
having issues with my camera. Okay. So, okay. Does it look like I'm looking at you?
yes, yeah,
Okay,
it
good.
looks fine.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely have that situation in QuickBooks Online. And I don't just have e-commerce clients and inventory clients. I definitely still have some service clients, and I have a few that are doing this. And this is as we have more and more different types of electronic payments, and people needing some deposit up front, as long as that's happening, we're going to be able to need to use this function.
All right. So from an accounting or bookkeeping standpoint, talk us through, because since you're the bookkeeper of the two of us, uh, what is the challenge when it comes to that when you're trying to handle that inside of QuickBooks
Well, QuickBooks desktop or online?
online and just in general, right? Like in any type of situation where there's a sale of goods and then there's a receipt of money up front, in from looking at it from a CPA or looking at it from the balance sheet profit and loss perspective of that scenario, what uh, what ends up being the part of the challenge when it comes to the way that kind of QuickBooks can handle these things, but then how you really should report these things.
Right, right. So I think what you're saying is if you receive something before you have earned it, then you have to make sure that you're booking it to unearned income. And I actually now have the AT&T guy knocking on the door. So I'll be back in just a couple minutes
Okay,
and then we can continue.
we'll continue. Yeah, so I'm going to share in the comments the workshop that we had done before about handling customer. Um, that's the way that you can do these things today. But we're going to be talking about a new feature that's in QuickBooks Desktop that allows you. This is one of those "what took you so long" features to come into play. About it's been something that's been asked for a long time because the situation is um, is hopefully when Rachel comes back pretty soon, we'll be able to kind of talk this through. But the the issue that really boils down to it is that this receipt of customer deposit, that event, that transaction needs to be a situation where it's unearned revenue, right? So um, that event needs to be separate from the invoice or the sale of goods, right? The recognition of that income, because nothing's with the exception of the money. It's That's the only thing that has taken place, is that they've given you money, and that's really now, in accounting terms, it's unearned revenue. It's unearned income. So you need to account for it in such a way. So some people, as far as the workflows are concerned, is they'll have that invoice and they'll take a payment against it, right? So that in accounting, the back end of QuickBooks will recognize that revenue because it's now applying it towards the income of the invoice. So that's not really what you want to do to handle that. So it ends up causing some extra work and some extra setup in order to set up these things, because the proper accounting terms would be that deposit is uh, so to do or action to record the receipt of the customer deposit. And that's kind of outside of the scope of the event of the invoice and then taking payments against that. So then when you invoice that customer, and you're going to apply that deposit towards the invoice to lower it, to lower that balance of the invoice, then it's a matter of applying that, which doesn't really happen automatically, right? So in QuickBooks Desktop 2024, and I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Rachel's not back yet. In this is Desktop 2024, and it's Enterprise that this version has found its way. This feature has found itself towards, right. So the big issue. Oops, that's another computer. I'm trying to move my mouse across my Mac to my Windows machine, and that didn't work. So the big issue is that um, there's a transaction type in QuickBooks Desktop that doesn't exist in QuickBooks Online, and that's called a sales order, which is another non-posting transaction that doesn't affect your books, right? So if we're going to, I'm just going to choose I was hopefully going to grab a prior one, but a sales order is a transaction that is listed here that doesn't affect um, the financials in any way, right? So typically, that's where people would start when determining and estimating work and those types of things, and then figuring whatever their business process is with it when it comes to taking those upfront deposits. Maybe it's a flat fee of $500, or maybe it's a third, a third, and a third, right? So maybe they have different payment terms that go along with their sales. So they're going to need to take that upfront deposit. Now in enterprise, there's a preference, right? So under payments, well, first you have to enable the sales order in order to even see that option of that transaction type, and that's under sales and customers and company preferences, where you've got your sales orders over here. Then once you've enabled your sales orders, then you're going to be enabling the prepayment uh, preference, which is this button here. And here comes Rachel back.
I'm back.
All right. So we're just talking about the preferences to turn on here
Yeah.
with regards to the prepayment. And there's a button in the payment section for company preferences called prepayment settings.
Ooh, I
And
love that.
then, yeah. And then what this does is it's a checkbox to turn on the prepayment. And then step two is set up your liability account, because Rachel, you were talking about, hey, this is unearned revenue. Uh, then when you're receiving a deposit, and why is it a liability account as far as the type of chart of accounts here?
Well, when you're doing accounting on an accrual basis, you need to make sure that you are following the rules of GAAP, which are generally accepted accounting principles. And that means when you receive a check for work that you haven't done yet, you can't book that as income. That's not that's incorrect. So you need to make sure that you're actually posting that as a debit to cash, and then a credit to the liability is the journal entry underneath that. And so you need to make sure then when you start doing the work and you start incurring that revenue, then you take that little bit out of the prepaid earning. I don't know if you already got to that point, but that's when you
Kind
would
of
look
talked
at that.
about it, but I wanted
Yeah, yeah.
your take
So
on it as well.
yeah, because it's technically a liability until you've actually earned it. So, and let's say
Right,
you've made an agreement
right,
to do maybe like 3 chunks of work or something like that. And so let's say maybe they prepaid the first two or something like that. So you want to make sure that you're recognizing that appropriately as you start doing that work.
right. And so, in the grand scheme of things, liabilities is an idea of what a business owes. So in owing speak, they owe them goods and services which haven't happened yet, right? So the invoice hasn't, quote unquote, occurred yet, so the sale hasn't happened, but they received money. So if at that moment in time, if the deal fell through, they would owe them something for the money that they've received, whether they're going to give it back or whether they're going to, half do the work or anything like that. That remains to be seen, but they still kind of owe the value of that deposit that's up front. So that's why it's a liability account listed here. Now, this gives you the ability to assign said liability account, whatever that happens to be. If it's not listed in here, then you can create a new one right here on the fly. But we're just going to use this customer deposit. Click
Yeah,
OK and
and side
OK.
note, gift card liabilities work the same way because that's somebody
Yep.
prepaying for something. So in my world too, in QuickBooks Online, I always, and I'm guessing in QuickBooks Desktop too, I always see when I'm doing cleanups and stuff, I see people book this straight to revenue. So it is important that this is booked correctly.
All right, I'm getting through all these warnings because I chose an inventory item that's not on hand. So let me, do I have anything? There we go. Just non-taxable sales. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to choose $1,000. All right, I'm going to save it. And it goes through the spell checker. Right. Then I probably have to close this and relaunch it. Let's go back to that. And we go over here. There's supposed to be a button. There's supposed to be a button up here that says, oh, there it is. Okay, I didn't see it. It says receive payments on the sales order, which is something that you couldn't do before. You couldn't receive a payment against a sales order.
So you can do that right when you're creating it.
Yes.
Oh, right. That's really cool. You definitely can't do that in QuickBooks Online.
No, you cannot. So now what happens is it goes to the regular, customer payment screen and desktop, but because you've clicked on it from the sales order, it will show invoices as well as sales orders to be able to apply that deposit against, right? So this was 1060. So I'm going to say it's a $500 payment. Oh, I got tab, and it puts my payment amount up at the top. So it's just like any other customer payment, but what it's doing is it's applying that to the sales order instead of an invoice. So there's no revenue recognition at this point because it's not applying it to a sales transaction. You would record it just like anything else, which was part of the challenge of doing these things as a sales receipt, is because people don't necessarily understand sales receipts when they're just used to invoices as their sales transaction. This is my workflow. It's an estimate that turns into an invoice, that turns into a payment that goes into the bank account, which then gets reconciled. Throwing in this extra thing of a sales receipt was a little bit of a challenging for some people to grasp. Right? It's like, oh, there's two different things to do. I'm used to entering in and recording a receipt of payment, and then voila, there we go. Right. So what a lot of people were doing mistakenly is, I'm used to entering in customer payments because that event of I've received money and I'm going to put it in the bank account is handled very well through a customer payment. So what they would do is they would enter a customer payment, but not apply it to the invoice yet, to leave it as an open credit. Right. But that doesn't affect, to your point, it doesn't affect the liability account. It just sits there as a negative asset, which is accounts receivable as a credit. But the workflow was handled very well, because then when you go to invoice it, you can say, hey, I've got open credits. Do I want to invoice it? And you say yes, and then the QuickBooks workflow works very smoothly at that point. So it was always a battle between handling things correctly and doing things efficiently,
right?
which is always a tug of war, and not just this, but anything that you have people do. I mean, you've built a whole business about doing things correctly in the deposits, right? With tracking fees and that sort of thing. So I'm gonna save this and close it.
Can I ask you a quick question? So then when, let's say I am a business owner and I've received a prepayment for something, is the best workflow to go in and do a sales order first or the customer payment?
Yeah, you're going to need to do the sales order first, or the non-posting transaction, in order to do this at all, right?
Okay.
Otherwise you're in the other workflows of doing the sales receipt as a separate event.
I see what you're saying. Okay, right.
Using an item that's posting to that liability account that you've set up. So it still handles the accounting side of things, but it's just a separate transaction to mirror that live event, right? Like the real world event of money has changed hands and it's going to go into the bank account today or whenever that is actually happening. is one thing that is going to need to happen, right?
But since you're putting it in with a sales order, you're avoiding it hitting revenue, and that it'll let you go in and put it into the prepaid revenue with the customer.
Right. Now there's a report that created. When you do this workflow where you're taking a payment on a sales order, it's going to flow into this report. So it'll be broken down by customer. So you'll see the payment and the sales order. You'll see that amount listed there, and then presumably when you apply it, it'll go away. So you'll be able to see it by that customer. All right. So I'm going to escape out of that. So the next step is, okay, I'm gonna sell this item, and I want to apply my prepayment, right? So you can recent transactions; those are two separate events, right? So the reality of that payment going into the bank account follows the normal workflow of going into undeposited funds or into the bank account, whichever you've specified inside of desktop, and voila, that happens, right? That the real world of that happening. One thing to point out here is that you are doing this all within QuickBooks, right? So if you're accepting that payment through like QuickBooks Payments or something like that, I haven't seen how that workflow fits into this, because you can't necessarily send the sales order to the customer for them to pay online, right? Maybe they've given you the credit card, and you can enter that in here through a payment, just like you can, when you're recording payments. But that would mean to be that the customer and the credit card and the person charging the card would be all in the QuickBooks at that time, right? So it's not like you can do it on a mobile device or anything like that. So QuickBooks Payments, if you're using that with this workflow, doesn't seem to work just yet. But that doesn't mean that they won't figure it out later, right? But baby steps, right? We finally got this feature. Hey, let's not throw out the bathwater with the baby, or whatever that that saying. Right. So we've got our sales order, and our next step is, okay, job's done. We're going to then invoice the customer for the rest, right? So you can do that in a couple ways. You can either just from the sales order itself, you can click on create invoice, or normally, you're not looking at the sales order for the customer. You're just wanting to create an invoice. So I'm going to create an invoice for the customer. As soon as I put the customer name on it, voila, it comes up with, hey, there's available sales orders to use or to apply. It's going to say, okay, and I'm going to create the invoice for all of the sales order, or maybe I want to do selected items. If you're partially billing for this, you can do that. But here we go. I'm just going to do the whole thing. Everything comes in here, the order, the $1,000. But wait, where's my deposit?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, where's the prepayment?
Right. Which is fine, because the next thing that you do is you save the invoice, and this customer has available credits that can be applied to the invoice. Would you like those credits to have those invoiced now? You say yes. Okay, now up at the top we have our prepayments that we can choose, and if there's other credits or discounts available, then they'll show up in this middle section, and anything that might be previously applied to this invoice will show here at the bottom, right? So here's our prepayment of $500. I just make sure that there's a check mark by it and the dollar amount, and then I click done. All right. Now, it just gives you a little one-time warning. Once you apply an available prepayment credit to an invoice, you won't be able to make any changes later. And so the way that it's handled is QuickBooks creates the journal entries and applies them, automagically in the background. So it's not something that you can modify later, because of the way that those applications of those payments and whatnot are handled in the background, right? So it's just a little warning there, and it does that. If I run my prepayment report again, it's gone, right? So I don't have this, this listing of,
okay.
open invoices or open payments to apply. This is kind of like my source of truth with, which you don't have to do, right? Because that's another task that people would do, is they'd have to create a report of that liability account sorted by customer, or total by customer, so that you could see invoices or sales deposits that were still outstanding and what their balance
Right.
would technically be. So Intuit has handled that by, they've actually seen it through, soup to nuts when it
So
comes to that, where they
basically, the
created a report for you.
invoice is the mechanism now that moves the prepayment out of prepaid and into income. Is that what's happening?
Right. Right.
Okay.
Because when you create the invoice, that's when you're recognizing the revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Sales orders don't do that. It's really just an order, right? But typically it's a non-posting. So it's kind of a transaction that sits between an estimate and an invoice, right? So you can kind of take it to that next
Right.
level, of, okay,
So,
this
Dan,
is promised.
what if they prepaid all of it?
Hmm.
Then would you go in and create an invoice? Let's say they prepaid $5,000 for all of it. And
Yeah.
then you were ready to go in and do the invoice and apply all of the $5,000, and then to put that revenue on the books. You could select the prepayments that are available, and that's the amount of the invoice, close it out and be done with it. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily need an invoice at that point, because I mean, it's just going to apply the open credit in this case,
Mm-hmm.
which is the prepayment, to zero out the invoice, and
Right.
then the invoice is what's recording the sale, right, of
Right.
the items, whatever that happens to be.
Because what would be the other way to record the sale?
Well, I mean, if you're turning, I mean, you need a sales transaction regardless, right? So
Right.
that's either going to be your invoice or your sales receipt, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
you
Yeah.
could feasibly, you can't create a you can't create a sales receipt from anything but a sales receipt.
Right.
So, you know, if you create an estimate that that's your workflow where they have to approve that first,
Mm-hmm.
um, then you're beholden to an invoice, because that's the only thing that can connect to, uh,
Got it. Okay.
that kind of sales transaction. So, I mean, it's a pretty well thought out feature. Um, the flip side of all of this is, of course, if you don't have, um, enterprise 2024, then you don't have this feature, and then of course you have to do these other workarounds, to be able to handle this workflow. So, which of course begs the question, what is happening with QuickBooks Desktop, right? Like, why would they why would they have this new feature, when everything else that seems like, if you go to QuickBooks.com, you're pretty hard pressed to find something that's related to desktop,
Right.
right? And you were saying earlier, it's like, yeah, I get this question all the time, even though you're an online, QuickBooks Online specialist. All your clients are in QuickBooks Online. These topics come up, right? Um,
And a
or
lot of them are coming over from Desktop Enterprise. So I'm taking a lot
yeah,
of these people that are previously in a QuickBooks POS, and they're switching over to something else. So and not being an expert, it's really helpful to hear anything about Desktop Enterprise.
right. So QuickBooks released made an announcement. Hang on a second. Where did it go? I had it here. Okay, I'm going to put it in the chat here so that people can see the comments. And I'm going to open this up. There we go. Well, there it is. If you can grab that from from the little captions, no, but it's in the it's in the comment. Oh, wait a minute, what happened now? Now I'm getting, oops, something went wrong.
Oh, mine was able to open up.
Okay, so QuickBooks made an announcement that, coming this year, 7/31, which is a significant date for Intuit and no one else. That's the end of their fiscal year. So 7/31/2024, they're going to stop selling new subscriptions of Pro and Premier. Right. In the past year, the only way to buy Pro and Premier was to call Intuit sales. Even they removed it from Amazon, right? Like that was and other retail outlets that they typically had those things. So in the past, in the past year up until this announcement, you would have to call Intuit sales, which opens the conversation for that sales agent to say, hey, what about QuickBooks Online, right? To have that conversation, to kind of chart their own course, because there is no bones about it that Intuit is heavily encouraging, trying to use the nice, polite ways of QuickBooks Online, and the reason behind all of that is the big bets that Intuit has made about AI, Intuit Assist, development of their QuickBooks ecosystem, doesn't really hold too well for desktop, right? Because desktop, there's only so much that you can do with regards to those types of technologies that are vastly and exponentially changing, right? So it's been a slow process of the degradation of services and offerings that are available in desktop. So this latest announcement of, hey, everybody's now on a QuickBooks subscription for Pro and Premier and Enterprise. We're going to stop selling new subscriptions after the end of our fiscal year, which is July 31st, 2024, right?
But just Pro and Premier, correct? Not for Enterprise.
Right. Just Pro and Premier, which you couldn't buy anyway, except by calling Intuit, which of course now, it's just a cycle of, okay, you can only get it through by calling Intuit, and they're going to start talking about QuickBooks Online during that conversation.
That sounds like so much fun. Don't you want to have that phone call with Intuit? Oh man.
Right. And I've seen it from the accounting community where, they tell their client to call and get Pro, and then they end up getting sold QuickBooks Online because they, salespeople are salespeople, right? I mean, they don't, my wife's a salesperson, so I got to watch what I say here. But they, some people have less scruples than others. Let's just put it that way. But in the grand scheme of things, QuickBooks Online Plus and Pro are relatively on par with the same, feature set. So if you raise the price of Pro to be at or less than what it is for Plus, why not have that conversation? Because that's really where the future of things are going. But if you don't need it, you don't need it, right? So I mean, it's a different conversation that accountants have with their clients than Intuit is having with the accountant's clients, right? So that's sort of one of those things to just be aware of, right? So here comes this announcement. So Pro and Premier, new subscriptions, they're not going to sell. That leaves the question of, what about the existing subscriptions? Right now, everybody is feasibly, and it should be, on a subscription for Pro and Plus. They have made, well, I mean, if you look at the article that I just posted there about that, I want to click on it so I can see it. There's what's the word? Asterisks all over it, right? Where it basically boils down to, there's no guarantee that Pro and Premier are going to live any longer. I mean, they can make their changes to the subscription at any time, right? So I have my own thoughts about what it's going to be. I don't know. I mean, it's all wait and see, right?
Yeah. Personally, I'm more interested in what's going to ultimately happen to desktop enterprise, because that's
Yeah.
really the world that I live
That,
in and you live in. And, we do a lot of
right.
cloud-based inventory solutions that sync in with QuickBooks Online. And it's really sort of what we're doing in the cloud is kind of recreating what we can do in desktop
Yeah.
enterprise. And so I'm really anxiously awaiting what's going to be happening with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that in and of itself is where QuickBooks and Intuit has kind of said, well, that's the flagship product for desktop, right? So they'll make that available. You can still buy it directly, on their website if you can find it. I would recommend you go with a QuickBooks solution provider or an accountant that can be able to get you a lifetime discount or something like that. If you actually are, and if you actually use the suite of services like payroll and payments, it could actually be less than what you were currently paying with Pro and Advanced not enhanced inventory, enhanced payroll,
Mhm.
because those costs are going up as well.
Right.
Um, Gold, Enterprise Gold, for example, bundles in enhanced payroll, and there's no additional employee fees, right? So if you have, 20 employees that you're paying through your QuickBooks Desktop, you don't have those employee charges and direct deposit fees like you would if you were to do Pro with enhanced payroll as a bundle. So it's worthwhile looking into. The question is, um, how long, right? And we don't know, right?
And it's
But
still entirely a desktop product. It is not
yes,
a cloud-based situation at all.
right. In order to kind of make a hybrid, you're looking at like a cloud hosting provider,
Right.
doing things like that, or setting up, some kind of VPN in your home network. But it does require you to download the software, save it, store it, and make it accessible, to be able to access it from the interwebs.
Yes.
Um, Whereas, QuickBooks Online, you buy a subscription, you log in, you're in, right? So the
And you also have
accessibility,
access to a lot of different specialists and providers that are entirely cloud-based, and
yep,
you have access to, I think, more help, really.
potentially, yeah. Well, I mean, you can't find help on their website, right? It's,
Right. I
it's
meant
just
help from people like me and you, not from
right,
Intuit. Sorry,
right.
Intuit. Love
Yeah, but on the, I
you.
mean, on the flip side of the coin, right? To your point, Rachel, here's a new feature that isn't in QuickBooks Online, right? So
Yes.
until that feature parity finds its way, right? But of course, this requires Intuit developers to talk to each other,
Yeah.
right? It's like, hey, we worked on this new feature in desktop enterprise. How did you do that? Okay, well, online developers go ahead and mirror that, right? So um, that's
Oh, hey,
that's
I
one of
have a
those things.
question, and maybe
Yeah.
do you think that maybe they would have an online version of Desktop Enterprise? Because if that were the case, because I actually really do like Desktop Enterprise and I like the functionality in it. Um, my issue is that I just don't do like remote hosting or any of that kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
so I just wonder, maybe if they were to build some kind of cloud-based system of that with all of their capability, with inventory, I wonder if maybe something like that would be happening. I mean, I don't know. Probably wouldn't be anytime soon, but you never know.
Yeah, I mean, typically what I've seen in when it comes to desktop versus online, it's just what is the foundation that they have to work with, right?
Mm.
And there's been all sorts of attempts at getting this to look like that and getting that to behave like the other thing, and so on and so forth. But they're very well aware that there is a gap, which has been, to their credit, has been close. That gap has been closening, and closening has been getting closer. But
Right.
of course, there still is a gap, and we're not talking about generally accepted accounting principles that you mentioned earlier. We're talking about the feature gap between
Yeah.
how things are handled inside of QuickBooks Desktop versus online. it's quite clear that they want the features to be in QuickBooks Online, and they want to build into those features, and that's going to happen either through development of those features or acquiring a company that does those features and bringing those features into the online
Yeah.
ecosystem.
And I think we know
Itself,
how great that works. I mean, for now,
yeah,
I'm content with the integration of a lot of different things into
right,
QuickBooks Online, and that all those things together make a really cool solution for what I'm doing. Yeah, I would think it would be really hard to create a whole
yeah,
cloud-based system replicating everything that would be going on in desktop enterprise, because that they're nowhere near that yet with
yeah.
QuickBooks Online at all.
And there's just some things that are fundamentally handled differently in the desktop space, right?
Yeah, well, that's why I was wondering, maybe they'd consider making like a whole separate product that isn't
Yeah,
QuickBooks Online. It's some kind of cloud-based not desktop, cloud-based enterprise solutions or
yeah.
something, maybe that, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, just for example, attachments, right? Like your attachments, and when you want to take a receipt and you want to attach it to something in QuickBooks Online, you can drag it, right? And
Mhm.
but what really happens to that attachment? Where does it go? That sort of thing. Um, that has to happen with a file inside of QuickBooks Desktop, right? So
Right.
it has to sit somewhere. Um, whether it's in the company file or in the cloud, it doesn't matter, right? It's got to save that somewhere, and it's obviously handled differently in QuickBooks Online than it is in desktop, which is one of the reasons why attachments don't come over, right?
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
That makes sense.
um,
Now, Dan,
because it's not really.
are you still servicing a lot of desktop enterprise clients?
Mhm. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, especially when it comes when the customer is, I want everything in one place, right? Like that enterprise is a great solution for that,
It is.
because they can have their payroll, they can have their inventory management, they can have their job costing. It's just the real world things of that. Like if you're heating air conditioning, right, and you want to schedule an appointment, QuickBooks doesn't do that, right? I mean, that's that's like the customer facing side of things. It doesn't really handle very well, even in online versus desktop, when it comes to that, scheduling and rescheduling and those types of things. You need an app for that. So you need an app for that, regardless of where you go as you get more complicated workflows. But yeah, I mean, with regards, like if they're doing all of those things, like and they really need a good job costing thing with their employees and their inventory and those types of things, QuickBooks Enterprise is a better outcome for that, because of the way that you can
Right.
handle those tasks inside of QuickBooks and get the reporting out that you're looking for. Um, Otherwise, because when you start to Frankenstein your business and have this workflow over here and that workflow over there, where you get useful data out of that, who knows, right?
Trust me. That's what I do, and it's really, really exhausting.
Right. So it's just where where you're most comfortable, and how you can get that information out of whatever source of truth, right? You're ending up being, and as you get more complicated in your workflows, then it gets, you're going to spread those things out, and then that's when you end up having somebody just with some huge spreadsheet uh, doing
Right.
doing something and getting meaningful data out of that. So
Right.
that's that. So we wanted to talk about this feature in Enterprise 2024, which is being able to finally uh, take and handle customer deposits inside of QuickBooks through a sales order functionality, and automatically apply them when you turn it into an invoice. Um, So we're going to have two blog articles on School of Bookkeeping, one for the old way and one for the new way,
Oh,
inside of
cool.
there. So you can check out those resources there on School of Bookkeeping. And Rachel, thank you for pinch hitting so quickly, and
Yeah,
even
I wish I knew more about QuickBooks Desktop Enterprise, but I don't know. I feel like I got really involved with online and a lot of the cloud-based solutions, and so I really didn't want to go too far deep into Desktop Enterprise. But now I feel like I do. I feel like I want to get to know it more.
another converter,
I know. Well, because I mean, and I was just going to ask you, I wonder if you know about many other new features that might be coming in Desktop Enterprise. And I mean, the idea of it is really great. I don't necessarily have the setup for, remoting into people's different
Mhm.
QuickBooks, but maybe down the road, maybe I could possibly get more involved in that and do a cloud-based situation too. So
Right.
we'll see.
Well, that's a great use case for quick answers, right? So
Yes.
Rachel is a quick answers customer. So when she has those questions like that, she can pop into School
Yes.
Bookkeeping, chat with me, and get her back on her feet, or off the ledge, depending on.
Best thing ever, the quick answers.
All right, so we will see you next time on the Workshop Wednesday. We appreciate you joining us today, and you all have a great day.